Welcome to Heartfelt Stories, where we dive deep into the incredible power of kindness. Today, we bring you touching real-life examples of how a single act of compassion can transform lives in ways we might never expect. In a world that often feels divided and fast-paced, these stories remind us of the profound impact we can have on one another by simply choosing kindness. Before we dive in, take a moment to imagine the ripple effect your own kindness can create. Whether it's a smile, a helping hand, or a grand gesture, you never know how far-reaching your impact could be. So, settle in, grab a warm drink, and prepare to be inspired by stories that prove kindness is not just a small action, it's a force that can change the world. Story 1. The Lunch Lady's Miracle. In a small town in Ohio, an elementary school lunch lady named Margaret quietly made history in her community. Margaret had worked at the school for over 30 years, greeting children with warmth and always making sure no student went hungry, even if they couldn't afford lunch. One day, a local newspaper highlighted her story. Margaret had been secretly paying off the lunch debts of students for years, using her own modest salary. When asked why, Margaret simply said, "No child should feel ashamed because they don't have money for lunch." Inspired by her story, the community rallied together. A fundraiser was organized, raising over $80,000 to not only pay off the current lunch debts but to create a fund ensuring no student would face this issue again. Margaret's simple yet profound kindness sparked a movement that reached far beyond her small town. Story 2. A stranger at the gas station. Late one night, Sarah, a single mother of two, found herself stranded at a gas station. Her car had run out of fuel, and she realized she had forgotten her wallet at home. With her young children asleep in the backseat, Sarah was on the verge of tears, unsure of what to do. A man in his late 40s, dressed in a mechanic's uniform, noticed her distress. Without hesitation, he approached and asked if she needed help. Sarah explained her situation, and to her surprise, the man filled her gas tank and handed her a $50 bill for her next stop. Years later, Sarah, now financially stable, decided to pay it forward by starting a program called Full Tank, which helps single parents with fuel and car maintenance. She credits that mechanic's random act of kindness for inspiring her to create a legacy of giving. Story 3. The Unexpected Tutor. James was a struggling high school student in New York City. He had dreams of becoming an engineer, but his grades in math were holding him back. His single mother, working 2 jobs, couldn't afford a tutor. One evening at a local library, James was hunched over his algebra homework, clearly frustrated. A retired teacher named Mrs. Clara noticed and offered to help. What started as a single session turned into weekly tutoring. Mrs. Clara refused payment, saying, "Your success is my reward." Years later, James graduated from college with honors in engineering. On his graduation day, he surprised Mrs. Clara with a heartfelt letter and a plaque thanking her for believing in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Today, James mentors underprivileged students in math, passing on the kindness he received. Story 4. The Quilt of Hope. In a rural community in Texas, a group of elderly women calling themselves the Sewing Angels decided to use their skills to help those in need. Each year, they created quilts and donated them to local shelters, hospitals, and foster care organizations. One quilt, in particular, found its way to a 12-year-old girl named Emily, who had just lost her parents in a tragic accident. The quilt was accompanied by a handwritten note that read, "You are loved. You are strong. This quilt is a hug when you need one." Years later, Emily, now an adult, tracked down the Sewing Angels and shared how that simple quilt had been her source of comfort during the darkest time of her life. Inspired, she started her own organization that provides care packages to grieving children, ensuring the kindness she received continues to spread. Story 5. A haircut that changed a life. In a bustling city barbershop, a young barber named Alex noticed a homeless man sitting on the curb outside. After finishing his last client for the day, Alex invited the man in for a free haircut. The man, named Robert, initially hesitated but eventually agreed. As Alex worked, he listened to Robert's story of losing his job and family due to unfortunate circumstances. After the haircut, Alex went a step further and posted Robert's story and transformation on social media, asking his network for help. The post went viral, and within weeks, Robert had job interviews lined up and was able to secure temporary housing. Today, Robert is back on his feet and regularly volunteers at homeless shelters, crediting Alex's kindness for giving him the second chance he needed. Story 6. A letter from a stranger. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many elderly individuals in nursing homes faced isolation, unable to see their loved ones. To combat this, a woman named Lily began a letter-writing campaign called Notes of Joy. Lily and her friends wrote thousands of letters to seniors in nursing homes, each filled with uplifting messages, jokes, and drawings. One recipient, an 89-year-old woman named Eleanor, said the letters were her lifeline during those lonely months. Years later, Eleanor's granddaughter started her own initiative called Letters Across Generations, encouraging young people to connect with seniors through handwritten notes. It was Lily's original act of kindness that inspired this beautiful intergenerational bond. Story 7. The Christmas Stranger Who Brought Warmth. It was a freezing Christmas Eve in Chicago when a young man named Daniel saw an elderly woman sitting alone at a bus stop. She was shivering, her coat thin, and it was clear she had been outside for a long time. Daniel, heading home from work, stopped and offered her his scarf and gloves, but he could tell she needed more. Instead of simply giving her his scarf, he invited her to a nearby diner, bought her a hot meal, and stayed to keep her company. As they spoke, he learned she had been displaced from her home and had no family nearby. Daniel didn't just stop at dinner. He contacted a local shelter and arranged for her to have a warm place to stay for the holidays. Word of Daniel's kindness spread in the community, and many others began volunteering at the shelter, donating clothes, and even offering to help the elderly woman find permanent housing. One act of compassion snowballed into a community-wide effort to support the unhoused during winter. Story 8. The anonymous college sponsor. Sophia had always dreamed of becoming a nurse but was unsure how she would afford tuition. Raised by a single father with limited resources, she worked tirelessly in high school, hoping for scholarships. Despite her efforts, the financial burden still loomed large. One day, she received a letter from her university stating that a portion of her tuition had been anonymously paid for the semester. Confused but grateful, she worked even harder, determined to make the most of the opportunity. Years later, Sophia discovered that the anonymous donor was a retired nurse who had once been in a similar position and wanted to give back. Inspired by this selfless act, Sophia, now a nurse herself, started a mentorship program for aspiring nurses from low-income backgrounds, ensuring the kindness she received would continue to uplift others for generations. Story 9. The Bakery That Gave More Than Bread. In a small town in Oregon, a bakery called Sweet Crumbs became known not just for its delicious pastries but for its heartwarming acts of kindness. The owner, Maria, had a simple policy: anyone in need could receive bread, no questions asked. One winter, a struggling father named Mark walked in with his two young children. Maria noticed their worn-out clothing and sensed they might be in need. She handed Mark a loaf of bread, a bag of cookies for the children, and whispered, "Don't worry about the cost. This one's on the house." That simple moment gave Mark the encouragement he needed during a difficult time. Once he got back on his feet, he returned to the bakery, not just to pay for the bread but to donate to Maria's Kindness Fund, which has since helped hundreds of families in the community with food and essential supplies. Story 10. A teacher's belief in a child's potential. Mr. Thompson was known for his strict yet compassionate teaching style. One year, a new student named Lily joined his class. She was quiet, shy, and had recently lost her mother. Her grades were average, and she often seemed disconnected from her classmates. Instead of assuming Lily was uninterested, Mr. Thompson took the time to learn about her struggles. He began encouraging her personally, leaving motivational notes on her assignments and praising her small improvements. By the end of the school year, Lily had not only improved academically but had gained confidence. Years later, she reached out to thank Mr. Thompson, explaining that his belief in her had changed her life. Inspired by his kindness, Lily pursued a career in education, determined to become the kind of teacher who saw the potential in every child, just as he had. Story 11. The Community Garden That Grew More Than Plants. In a low-income neighborhood in Detroit, a vacant lot had become overrun with trash and neglect. Then came Maria, a retired horticulturist, who saw an opportunity. She gathered a few volunteers and began clearing the space, determined to turn it into a community garden where anyone could grow food and learn about gardening. It wasn't easy. Funding was limited, and not everyone believed it could succeed. But Maria persisted. As the garden began to flourish, so did the sense of community. Neighbors who had never spoken before began working together, sharing stories, recipes, and even hosting weekly potlucks using the garden's harvest. One day, a struggling single mother shared that the fresh produce had significantly reduced her grocery bills and inspired her to teach her children about healthy eating. What started as a simple act of kindness, a garden, became a beacon of hope, nourishment, and connection for the entire neighborhood. Imagine how many lives could change if each of us embraced kindness in our daily lives. Holding the door open for someone, sharing words of encouragement, or helping a neighbor in need. These small actions build bridges and remind us of our shared humanity. As you finish this video, we invite you to think of one act of kindness you can do today. Remember, it doesn't have to be grand. Even the smallest gesture can create ripples that extend far beyond what you can see. Thank you for being part of Heartfelt Stories. Let's continue sharing positivity and making the world a kinder place, one story at a time. If these stories moved you, share this video and encourage others to spread kindness. Together, we can create a brighter future. Stay kind, stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next episode.